Brother made my life hell, then got my wife pregnant. Now he... Ever been betrayed by someone you considered family? I never thought that would happen to me. Growing up, my younger brother Jake was the golden child in the family, always getting the praise and attention, while I was left to fend for myself. I didn't mind it too much at first. I had my own life, my own interests, but everything changed when I married Liz, the love of my life. It wasn't until after our wedding that I discovered Liz had been sleeping with Jake behind my back. Worse still, she was pregnant, and the baby might not even be mine. That's when the real betrayal hit. I thought family was supposed to stick together, but what happens when your own brother and wife tear you apart? Jake and I never really got along. When we were kids, it was like I was invisible to everyone, except my parents. They doted on Jake. Everything he did was perfect in their eyes. I was just the older, quiet one who kept to himself. At first, I didn't mind it too much. I was content with my own space. But as the years went by, I started to notice how my parents' attention always seemed to be on him. They praised him for every little thing, while I got nothing but criticism. At school, things weren't much better. Jake was the loud, outgoing type. He had friends, a social life, and the kind of popularity I could never seem to get. On the other hand, I was shy, a bit awkward, and not much into socializing. I stuck to my studies, and that's where my confidence came from, but I couldn't escape the feeling that Jake had everything handed to him on a silver platter, while I had to work twice as hard for any kind of acknowledgement. Our family always brushed off my frustrations. "That's just how brothers are," they'd say. "Jake just has more energy, more charisma. You'll learn to deal with it." But the bullying from Jake didn't stop with just words. He'd take my things, mock my hobbies, and make fun of the way I looked. It wasn't just childish teasing, it was relentless. Still, I kept my distance. I buried the pain of being overlooked, and in my teenage years, I just tried to survive. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was the one everyone in the family cherished, and I was just there. I moved away for college, and for a while, things started to look up. I found a group of friends focused on my studies, and finally felt like I had control over my own life. That was when I met Liz. She was different from anyone I'd ever met. We clicked instantly. She was kind, funny, and we shared so many of the same interests. It was like we were meant to meet. We started dating seriously, and everything seemed perfect. After graduation, we got married in a small ceremony with just close family and friends. I thought I was on top of the world, finally living the life I had dreamed of. But, of course, things didn't stay perfect for long. I never thought for a second that my brother, Jake, would be a threat to my relationship with Liz. Sure, I was used to him getting attention, but he was my brother. Family was supposed to be trustworthy, right? I never expected him to cross a line, and Liz always seemed to get along well with him. They'd hang out when I was busy with work, go to the gym together, and I assumed everything was fine. After all, what harm could there be in them being close? But then, a few months after we got married, I started noticing small things. Strange looks, awkward silences when I'd walk into a room, and a change in Liz's behavior. She became distant, often busy with work stuff or hanging out with Jake. I didn't think too much of it at first. I just figured maybe she was stressed from adjusting to married life. Then, one evening, I came home earlier than expected. I found Liz and Jake sitting on the couch, looking far too comfortable together. They were laughing and talking in a way that felt off. Liz's smile seemed forced, and Jake's gaze lingered just a bit too long. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just overthinking things. But deep down, something didn't sit right. Make sure to like the video and subscribe so you never miss more shocking and real stories like this one. It wasn't until a few weeks later that everything came crashing down. I had been working late one night and decided to surprise Liz with dinner. I was excited to spend some time together, maybe talk about our plans for the weekend. But when I walked through the door, everything was different. I could hear voices from the living room. As I stepped closer, I froze. Through the crack in the door, I saw Jake and Liz sitting too close together on the couch, kissing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My body went cold. My mind raced. It didn't make sense. Liz and I had just celebrated our first anniversary, and Jake had always been a part of our lives, but this was unforgivable. I stood there, frozen, watching them break every boundary that should have existed between siblings and spouses. When they finally pulled away, Liz looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. Her face went pale, and her eyes widened in shock. but there was no guilt, no shame. What? What is this? My voice came out shakier than I intended, and I could feel the anger building up inside me. I can explain, Liz said, but her words sounded hollow, like she was searching for the right way to justify the unjustifiable. Jake, on the other hand, didn't even seem sorry. He just stared at me, his usual smug expression never faltering. "It's not what you think," he said, almost casually. "We were just talking, man. Nothing more." I couldn't believe it. I could feel my heart shattering in real time. Not only had my wife betrayed me, but it was with my brother, the same brother who had tormented me for years, the same one who had been the family's golden child, while I was always left in the background. "You're lying," I said, my voice low and filled with rage. "You've been hiding this from me for how long? You were sleeping with my wife behind my back?" Liz stood up, tears welling up in her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen, I swear. We didn't plan this, but there was something between us, and I didn't know how to stop it." Jake gave a small, bitter laugh. "Yeah, well, what's done is done. You weren't paying enough attention, and now, look where we are." His words hit me harder than I ever expected. It wasn't just the affair, it was the fact that he didn't even regret it. It was like it was just another conquest to him. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my family, crumbled in that instant. And the worst part? Liz wasn't even trying to explain herself. She was defending it. After the confrontation, I left the house. I couldn't bear to be in the same room with either of them. I spent the night at a friend's place, completely overwhelmed by everything. My mind kept replaying the image of them together, the look in their eyes, the way Liz tried to justify what had happened. And the worst part? Jake, my brother, the one I had always tried to ignore and move past, seemed completely unbothered by it. The next day I went back to the house, determined to get some answers. I wasn't going to let them treat me like I didn't matter. When I walked through the front door, the tension was palpable. Liz and Jake were sitting in the living room, but neither one of them looked up at me when I entered. It was like I wasn't even there. Liz had a red, puffy face, as if she had been crying all night, but there was no apology. There was no remorse. I turned to Liz first. "You're pregnant, and the baby might be his." The words felt like a knife to my gut. I could barely get the sentence out, my chest tightening with the weight of it. "How could you let this happen?" Liz tried to speak but faltered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how this all happened, but it did. And I never meant to hurt you. I really thought it was over between us, but I was wrong." My head was spinning. "What are you even saying? You're sorry? This isn't a mistake, Liz. This is betrayal." I turned to Jake, my anger flaring. "And you have no shame, do you? You've ruined my life, my marriage, and my family. And for what? For a cheap thrill?" Jake just shrugged, not even showing an ounce of guilt. "What can I say, man? It happened. We both made choices. You weren't there when she needed you, and I was. It's not like it was intentional." I had never been so disgusted in my life. The words coming from both of them were so cold, so devoid of real remorse. The betrayal wasn't just in their actions, it was in the way they justified it, as if it was no big deal. I couldn't keep it together anymore. "I want a divorce, Liz, and you, Jake, don't ever come near me again." Liz sobbed harder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not anymore. The trust was gone. It had been shattered into pieces, and I couldn't put it back together. As I walked out of the room, I felt like a part of me was dying. I was losing my marriage, my brother, and the family I thought I knew. The pain was unbearable, but I knew what I had to do. I had to take control of my life again. The days that followed felt like a blur. I barely ate, barely slept, just lost in a sea of betrayal and anger. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Was it just physical, or was there something deeper? And what about the baby? Was it even mine? It was too much to process all at once. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I knew I couldn't stay in that house anymore. It was suffocating. So I packed up my things and moved into a small apartment across town. I didn't want to be near any of it, the memories of the life I thought I had, the family that I had trusted. I needed space to think, to breathe. But as the days turned into weeks, the reality of the situation set in. The divorce process was far more complicated than I had imagined, especially with the possibility of the child not being mine. The paternity test was something I dreaded, but I knew it was something I had to do. If I was going to start over, I needed to know the truth. During this time, Jake and Liz kept trying to reach out. Liz called me multiple times, begging for forgiveness, telling me how much she regretted what happened. But it all felt hollow. I couldn't listen to her anymore. What hurt even more was the way Jake seemed to think everything would blow over. He would send me texts like, "We're family, man. Let's just move on. This is over, right?" But how could I move on from this? One evening, I ran into Jake at the grocery store. He was standing in the aisle, pretending like nothing had happened, like we could just pick up where we left off. When he saw me, he smiled. It was the same smug grin that had always made me feel small when we were kids. "You're still holding on to that?" he asked, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Come on, man. We're family. This thing with Liz, it's done. It was a mistake. You've got to let it go." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I stared at him for a few moments, trying to hold back the flood of emotions that were threatening to pour out. "A mistake? You slept with my wife, Jake. You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." He just shrugged. "Yeah, well, you were busy, and we were just trying to be there for each other. You're acting like we killed someone, dude." It was as if he truly didn't understand the gravity of what he had done. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of how much pain he had caused. It was infuriating, and I had reached my breaking point. "You know what?" I said, my voice trembling with anger. "I don't care about your excuses anymore. I'm done with you. We're done. Don't ever call me again." His face hardened, and for a second, I could see the facade crack. But he quickly recovered, his usual arrogance taking over. "Fine, whatever. You'll come around. You always do." I turned and walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making the right choice. I was finally cutting the toxic ties that had held me back for so long. The next few days were a whirlwind. The divorce paperwork was moving forward, but there was one thing that I couldn't escape: the paternity test. It was a necessary step, and though I dreaded it, I knew I couldn't leave this part of the story unresolved. Every time I looked at Liz, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was a lie: our marriage, my trust, and especially the baby. Liz had left me with 1,000 questions. Was the baby really mine? Could I be raising someone else's child all this time? It was tormenting. But when the test results finally came back, the truth hit me harder than I expected. The phone call came while I was sitting in my apartment, trying to distract myself with work. The lab tech's voice on the other end was clear. "Mr. Harris, we've completed the paternity test, and the results indicate that David is the biological father of your wife's child." I dropped my phone, the words ringing in my ears like a loud crash. I knew it deep down, but hearing the truth out loud was a whole different level of devastation. The life I had built, the life I thought was mine, had been a lie. I wasn't just betrayed by Liz. I had been lied to every single day by both her and my brother, David's child. I stood there, frozen for what felt like an eternity. What did this mean for me? For my marriage? For my life? The anger I felt in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced, but it was quickly replaced by a deep, aching sadness. I didn't know how I could move forward. I didn't tell Liz right away. I couldn't face her yet. Instead, I started the next step in what would now be my new life. I began calling lawyers to make sure everything with the divorce was as smooth as possible. I had to prepare myself for the inevitable battle. The truth was out there now, and there was no way I could continue to pretend everything was okay. But I couldn't ignore the fact that my world had changed in a matter of days. The baby, my son, as I had thought, was now someone else's, and that, more than anything, felt like the biggest betrayal of all. A few days later, I finally faced Liz. She had been calling and texting nonstop, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. Every time I saw her name on my phone, I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak. But there were still some things I needed to hear from her, things I hadn't yet gotten answers to. I asked her to meet me at a small cafe, a neutral place where I could try to keep some distance. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. The woman who once seemed like everything to me now felt like a stranger. She sat down across from me, her eyes red from crying, but there was no more guilt, no more remorse. It was like the tears had dried up, and all that was left was emptiness. "I know you've seen the paternity test results," she started, her voice weak. "I'm so sorry, Mark. I never meant for it to go this far. Then why did it? I asked, cutting her off. Why did you betray me like this? You and my brother? How could you do that to me? She shook her head, looking down at her hands. I didn't know how to stop. Things between us were complicated. After everything that happened with David, I didn't know how to deal with it. He was there for me when you weren't. I don't know how to explain it, but it just happened. I stared at her, disbelief settling in. You say that like it's an excuse. He was my brother, Liz. My brother. And you let it happen. She looked up at me then, her eyes pleading for understanding. I know it was wrong, and I wish I could take it back. I can't undo it, but I never wanted to hurt you, Mark. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all crushing me. But you did. You and Jake both hurt me. I gave you everything, my trust, my love, my family, and you betrayed it. Now, I'm left picking up the pieces of my life, and you don't even seem to care about the mess you've made. Liz reached for my hand, but I pulled away quickly. Don't touch me, I said, my voice steady but filled with anger. You don't have the right anymore. There was a long silence, and for a moment, I thought she might leave. But she stayed, tears filling her eyes again. I just want to make things right, Mark. I don't want to lose you. Please, can't we try to fix this? I shook my head. Number? This is beyond fixing, Liz. There's no going back. You've done too much, and I can't pretend that I can just overlook it. You broke my trust, and I can't live with that. I can't look at you the same way anymore. She seemed to deflate, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of my words finally hit her. I understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I'll always love you, Mark. I hope you find happiness. I hope you find peace, I replied, standing up and walking out without another word. It was time to close that chapter of my life. The betrayal was too deep, too painful, and I couldn't keep allowing it to eat away at me. After my conversation with Liz, I didn't want to waste any more time. I knew I had to confront my parents, especially my father. It was time to tell them the truth, to finally lay out everything that had happened. I didn't care about their judgment anymore. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about taking responsibility for the consequences of their actions as well. I called my dad first. He answered quickly, like he was waiting for my call, but when I told him I needed to meet in person, there was a hesitation in his voice. I knew he must have suspected something was wrong, but I didn't think he was prepared for the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. We met at his place the next day. The awkward tension between us was thick, like we both knew something had been brewing for a while, but no one had said anything yet. As soon as I sat down across from him, I laid it all out. I told him about the affair, about Liz and Jake, about the paternity test. And as the words spilled from my mouth, it felt like every ounce of anger, confusion, and pain finally came rushing to the surface. I watched my dad's face as the reality of it sank in. His expression went from concern to disbelief, and then to something much darker. Disappointment. He was silent for a long time, and for a moment I regretted telling him it all. But then he spoke. Mark, I don't know what to say. I've known Jake's been trouble for years, but I never thought it would come to this. His voice was shaky, as if he couldn't fully process what I had told him. You never saw it, did you? I said bitterly. You always took his side. You thought he could do no wrong. And now, look where we are. My father's face hardened. I didn't know this was going on, Mark. I didn't see the affair, and I didn't know the full extent of what was happening. I trusted him. I trusted both of you? His words were painful, but they were also a bit of a relief. For once my father wasn't brushing it off. He wasn't siding with Jake. For the first time, he seemed to realize how serious this was. I nodded, my anger slowly shifting to something else. Sadness. I'm done with Jake. And Liz. I'm moving on, Dad. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. I could see the guilt in my father's eyes, but I couldn't stay there. I had to leave. I had to start moving forward, even if it meant walking away from everything I had known. The last part of my family, the part I had always tried to hold on to, was gone. But somehow, I felt like I was free. After the conversation with my father, things didn't get any easier. The weight of everything that had happened was still there, but I couldn't let it consume me any longer. I started focusing on myself, on getting through the day without being constantly reminded of the betrayal. But that didn't mean I was done confronting the situation. It was only a few days later when I got a call that I wasn't expecting. Jake. He had been texting me, but I ignored him. He was the last person I wanted to speak to, but for some reason this time, I answered. "Mark, we need to talk," Jake said, his voice urgent. "I've got nothing to say to you," I replied, my voice filled with anger. I had made it clear that I was done with him. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, almost sounding sincere for once. "But I need to explain myself. I know I've screwed up, big time. But it's not what you think. I never meant for any of this to happen." I was silent for a moment, trying to process what he was saying. "Not what I think? You slept with my wife, Jake. There's no explanation for that. There's no reason I need to hear from you." He sighed heavily. "I know, I've been a jackass, but Stop," I interrupted. "I've heard enough from you. You're my brother, and you betrayed me. There's no coming back from that." I paused, feeling the sting of the situation again. "I'm done with you. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't come near me." Jake's voice wavered for a moment, like he was going to argue, but then he just sighed and hung up. I felt a strange sense of relief after that conversation. It was like I had finally closed the door on the past. I didn't need to fight anymore. It was over. But as time went on, I still struggled with the fact that Jake and Liz weren't just going to fade away. My mind kept circling back to one question. How could they both do this to me? How could they hurt me this way? I had started seeing a therapist to help process the pain and frustration. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the only way I could move forward without carrying this anger with me forever. Months passed since that fateful day, and the wounds, while still there, had started to heal. My life was slowly returning to some semblance of normalcy, though it wasn't the same. I didn't expect it to be. The person I was before, who I thought I could trust, the family I thought I knew, wasn't who I was anymore. But I had learned to live with it. I had made it clear to Jake that I wanted nothing to do with him, and I meant it. There were moments when the anger flared back up, like when I saw his face on social media or heard people in the family talk about him. I still felt that visceral sting, but I had decided that letting him get to me any longer would only give him more power over my life. Liz had reached out several times too, begging me to talk, apologizing over and over, asking for a second chance. But after everything, I just couldn't. The idea of trying to rebuild what we had felt like an impossible task. Maybe part of me thought I'd never fully heal, but the bigger part knew I couldn't keep holding on to something that had been destroyed. I spent a lot of time focusing on myself, something I hadn't done in a long time. I worked on my career, started going to the gym regularly, and made new friends. The biggest change, though, was that I found my confidence again. I was no longer the guy who let people walk all over him. I wasn't the one who was ignored or mistreated. I realized I had the power to shape my own life, and no one could take that away from me anymore. Then one day, I got a call from my parents. They wanted to meet. I had been avoiding them since the fallout, especially my mother, who had defended Jake's actions for so long. But something in me told me I had to face them, at least once. We met at a cafe, and when they saw me, it was clear they were nervous. My mother, usually the one who had fallen over Jake no matter what, looked humbled. My father, who had finally realized the depth of the situation, seemed different. The look in his eyes was apologetic, but I wasn't sure if it was enough. "Mark," my dad said, his voice softer than usual, "I just want to say how sorry I am for everything, for not seeing the truth sooner. We should have supported you, and I'm sorry for everything you've gone through." My mother nodded in agreement. "We've made mistakes, but we're here now, son. We want to be part of your life again." I didn't respond right away. I needed time to process their words. My father had cut Jake off, and though my mother had tried to make excuses for him, she had distanced herself from him too. The family dynamic had shifted, but was it enough to heal the damage? Could I truly forgive them for not seeing what had happened right in front of their faces? "I don't know if I can forgive you both yet," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm willing to move forward. I need time. And I'm not going to forget how all of this went down." My mom looked like she wanted to say more, but my dad stopped her. "We understand. Take your time. We're here for you." I appreciated their honesty, but I also knew that the relationship we once had could never fully be repaired. The cracks were too deep, the foundation too broken. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. And with that, I realized something. The power wasn't in the anger or the betrayal. It was in letting go, moving forward. It's been a few months since that conversation with my parents. I've made peace with the fact that my relationship with Jake is over, and that Liz will always be a part of my past. The truth is, I've come to realize that family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, loyalty, and mutual care. And those things were never present in my relationship with either of them. Life has begun to feel normal again. I've been focusing on myself, on healing, on rebuilding my confidence, and on forgiving myself for letting things get so out of control. It wasn't my fault. I didn't deserve to be treated like that. And while it'll always hurt, I know it's a part of my story now, something I can learn from, something that's made me stronger. In the end, it wasn't just about forgiving my brother or Liz. It was about forgiving myself for not realizing sooner how toxic everything had become. I can't change the past, but I can shape my future. I'm starting to date again, taking things slow, learning to trust people again. I've learned that trust doesn't come easily anymore, but it's possible. And while I still don't know where the future will take me, I'm okay with that. I'm not the same person I was when this all started. I'm stronger, wiser, and more at peace with myself. As for Jake and Liz, they're together now, raising the child that I thought was mine. But I've decided to leave them to their lives. They don't affect me anymore. I've moved on, and for the first time in a long time, I feel free. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted deeply? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. If you're struggling with a situation like this, don't keep it all inside. Sometimes talking about it can help you find the clarity you need. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories and lessons learned from difficult experiences.